Hi guys, Swift here. Before I get onto the main point of the video today, I'd just like to mention the 3D map making competition that is currently underway. The end date is July the 1st, and to enter, all you need to do is create a map in 3D Canvas, and then when you're done, right click on it and select Share Scene. Make sure the author field contains either your Discord or Patreon username so we can tell it was made by you, and your map will be in the running to win a year's subscription to both FoundryVTT and the Ripper93. Alright then, on to the main part of the video. Hi guys, Swift here with a bit of a 3D Design With Me session, and today I'm looking to create myself a swamp settlement map. In the background here you'll see some footage from me making the map. What I've done is I've recorded building the map there, and then it took about an hour, so I've set it up to 4 times speed so that it's a little bit quicker for the video here. So first thing I did with any 3D scene is I generated some terrain using the terrain tool on the right there. What I did was I went into the fine tuning section here to see if I could get some terrain variation that I like the look of. Ideally what I'd have is like a raised portion that would be up above the ground and then some lower portions that are only just barely above the water. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of generating new terrain, checking the fine tune, generating new terrain, checking the fine tune, and then scrolling this little box to decide what actually appears on the map. And then once I've found a kind of a map layout that I think I might like, I add in some water as well, and then I kind of shrink down the map very, very low so that it's all quite subtle rolling kind of hills, because I want the highest point of the map to not really be that far above the water, because going for a kind of swampy, coasty kind of look. That map I wasn't particularly happy with, so I tried again, and I got this shape here that I quite like the look of, because there is kind of multiple little islands, sort of. But as you can see with the way that I've got the height very low, it's more sort of just a narrow channel between two sections. What I did then was switch on the gradient shader, or switch over the gradient shader from using the inclination of the map to using just the height. And then I put some textures on there. These are from the FoundryVTT textures folder. They are the ancient fortress textures. And then I arranged them so that underneath the water there was a kind of rocky dirt. At the edge of the water there's a more normal dirt texture, and then up above that is the grass. And then I kind of fiddle with the begin sliders there to say what altitude each one starts at. Next thing I did was recolor or tint the textures on the terrain there, and then I gave retexturing the water a quick go. I didn't really get a result that I liked, so I just went back to using the default texture that was on it before. So that's fine. There's something I did end up doing is making a duplicate and lowering that below the water surface slightly. And I felt that that kind of gave a pretty decent effect where we had this edge of the water that's quite transparent, and you can see through it fairly well, and then in the centre of the channels the water was a little bit harder to see through. So then I went over to the April 2024 inventory scene and just copied that over to this main scene here. So I just copied all the assets from the other scene, and then I just moved them over to the edges of the map just to get them out of the way. And what I like to do is just have these piles of assets here as things I can just look at and kind of think about what I want to bring into the map. I knew that I wanted these large buildings in there, big buildings with some stairs built into them and on stilts, so they're pretty good for having at the edge of the water. So I had 2 of those to act like the kind of, important person's houses. And then I also had some smaller huts towards the edge just for either extra members of the community or maybe for storage. And then some other huts as well on the other side, slightly fancier, slightly nicer roofs. And then I thought the next thing I wanted to do would be build the wall, because having a bit of a wall on the place would kind of delineate its edges a little bit better, I think, and I think that would end up feeling quite good, or looking quite good rather. I also brought over some walkways with stairs and some fences to make a little bridge. Just a footbridge over, obviously. Not going to get any great construction here. This is just a kind of little settlement for a few people. So I slapped those down, lined it up roughly, and then kind of copied them over, flipping over the stairs and hillside, and then centering it on the river, and then adding in the fence here as well. So the style of this set is a very sort of basic construction looking thing, so I think it's quite good because it means you can be very, very rough with your placement for things. You don't really need to get everything lined up perfectly, because, the idea is these are just put together really quickly and easily by whoever's living in the area out of local materials. So, there's nothing kind of fancy or complicated going on here. So I just kind of copied the wall pieces along the wall, and then I added a bit of curve in just for a little bit more visual interest there, and I did the same again on the other side. I curve down from the front, and then once we get down to the river, we straighten back out, and we just go along in roughly a straight line, making sure to kind of lower them down to be in the ground, and then angling the last one, just for a bit of interest there. Next thing to do, just add another structure into the little village here. I wasn't sure how many buildings I would like to add in here, so I just kind of put in enough that it kind of looked fairly dense. Then at this point I've started to put decorations down. So I've got like these big statues here that can flank the gate. And then I take these wall pieces here, and I think what these could represent is older structures that were perhaps ruined, or that used to be here and are now no longer present. So I kind of made some roughly rectangular shapes, left some gaps in them, so that, it looked like incomplete buildings, and then gave them angles to look like they've maybe just kind of fallen over in time and sunk into the earth, because, it's a very marshy area sort of thing. And then I took this less ruined-looking wall and used it to denote where I will put a road later. Because, of course, you can paint the terrain in 3D canvas now. Don't need to use any external tools. I'll show that later on. Another ruined X structure there just for the other side. And then looking back over the gear, I use this opportunity to think about painting. So the way that you paint a map in 3D canvas is you go to the Splat Map shader, and then you click the little paintbrush next to Splat Map, and you can do this sort of thing with it. It's a little bit glitchy to start with. I need to tick flip Y for this specific map. If you end up like painting and it paints the opposite side of the map, just tick flip Y. That'll do that. And because I've done that, I need to back out, go back in. It's all good. And then hit apply, of course. So as you can see, I can just kind of click on the map itself and just paint myself a road. I don't need to do any particularly complicated task here. And then I add a bit more dirt to these ruined buildings. And then what I do is I go in and I turn up the repeats on the dirt and also colour it the same that I've got the dirt for the actual splat map itself, so that it blends in really nicely. I think I'll continue the ruined building theme on the edge here, so I get the kind of burnt out shack from the April set and then sink it into the earth a bit. So it's a bit more obvious evidence of a structure or a settlement that used to be bigger or used to be here. And then I just add a bit more dirt around the side of that, and then I kind of paint in a couple of paths that are less opaque, but just a little bit more detail to show that people have been walking here. Next thing I do is just use the asset browser here to look for a campfire. There's a bunch of them in the set. I kind of am an R between which one I might want. I kind of think maybe this one, maybe this other one. I end up going for the kind of paler one, just because I kind of like the look a bit more. And then I bring over some sleeping bedrolls here. I'm playing a lot of Baldur's Gate, so I kind of like the idea of just having bedrolls right next to the campfire. And what I can do later on is just put a light on there and use that as a fireplace if I like. Next up is trees, and I want to have a look at what trees I have available. So I just kind of look through the Bailey Wiki module folder, and I just kind of flick into the trees section and have a look and see what there is. And I start selecting a whole bunch of trees, but then I realize, there's too many trees here. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of select a couple of them, these conifer ones here, and then also reduce the scale on them so they're a little bit smaller, a little bit more in line with the rest of the map, I think. Once I've scattered a few of them around, I start looking around for what bushes we have in the Bailey Wiki module. We've got quite a few, but I was just looking for one that just happened to match the colours of these trees I've already put down. So I've got some from a more recent set. They didn't really match. Just flick through, and I found these from this graveyard set that seemed to work rather well. So what I did is just selected those and then started shift-clicking around. These are kind of hard to see from a distance. They only really pop in properly once you've zoomed in. And also, I probably didn't need to keep these at 0.5 scale. I probably could have left them at 1 and it would have looked fine. And I just kind of manually click around. And what I'm trying to do is just make sure that there's not like any obvious lines or anything. And then kind of put them around the edge of the village, because I don't want too many of them in the way of the players in the playing area. These are all just supposed to be, decorations. Next thing to do is just fiddle with the sun, see if I can get an angle I like. I end up going for something that's very similar to the angle it started at. I just put some scene tilt in, because I don't like shadows running directly east-west. and then I fiddle around with the sky just to kind of get a scene color I like. I quite like that color, so then I move on to getting an advanced sky, which is a setting that was added semi-recently that allows you to get this really nice kind of animated sky in the background here that also contributes to the scene lighting a bit. I have another look through all the pieces, and then I just clear away the ones that I'm not going to use. And there we go. That is a map very quickly done, just from a general idea of some kind of swamp village. And I think this is the kind of map that would be quite useful for the campaign. You know, the players are visiting this place, or maybe they're using it as a temporary base, that sort of thing. Hopefully this video has been useful to you. I hope it gives you a little bit of insight into just how casual, I guess, you can be with map creation. You really can just slap down a bunch of props and then just fiddle around with them until you find something you like. As ever, any sort of questions or comments, I'd love to hear them down in the comments below or on the Discord. So until next time, I'll see you later.